Afternoon, everybody, and welcome along to our fourth and final webinar on VIA sponsorship. I'd like to welcome everybody along. We have an excellent group of attendees today and some excellent speakers on the subject of the future of sponsorship. So in total, we are almost absolutely full to our capacity on this Zoom webinar. Some very interesting people listed, and many who've been on the three previous sponsorship discussions around the topics. So what is the future of sponsorship today? How do you approach events? How do you create value? And how do you give a return on investment and a return on objectives for your sponsors? As always, we last week gave away a book to the best question. So we want you to ask questions. You can ask them by emailing them in or looking at the Q&A point at the bottom of your page and write your question in. And then at the very end, we will bring you in to ask a question of the three panelists. I'll be asking some questions of the panelists when they're finished their 15 to 20 minute discussion, 15 minutes. They'll be keeping it short and succinct so that you really get a feel for it. But please get engaged and ask questions, certainly at the very end. So for the best question, we've got a book by Andy Robertson, team captain for the Scottish football team, which gave us the biggest lift in 2020 last week, and hopefully can do the same again tonight. And we'll match that with a book on the value and how to create value in sponsorship from Ardie Kola, the world's top academic. So if you can see both of these books, we'll give away both of these books to the best question relevant to the future of sponsorship for our panelists. So it brings me on to talk about our panelists today, and we have some very senior people within the sponsorship world here today, from Mel Young, the chairman of Sport Scotland, to Sophie Morris, who is the European Sponsorship Association director and on various boards internationally, certainly in Europe, connected to sponsorship. She also works with Loughborough University London, and she's also the founder of her own sports marketing agency, Mill Harbour Marketing. So the third participant today is Mark Harrison from Toronto in Canada, who runs probably the largest sports sponsorship conference in the world, Sponsorship X, and runs various sports marketing and marketing agencies in the United States and North America, based out of Canada. So he'll tell you a little bit about his background and the subject matter, which is the future of sponsorship. So it brings me on to our first speaker today. Our first speaker today is Sophie Morris. Sophie from ESSA. So I'd like to introduce Sophie to you, who's going to talk about the future of sponsorship moving forward. Sophie.
Hi, Gordon. Thank you. Hello, everyone listening. Oh, that's not my radio.
Sorry.
The future of sponsorship, what will it entail, and who knows the answer to that? Well, I think I can help because we asked the ESSA members. We asked them to take part in some research, and I'm going to share the answers with you today. Firstly, just to apply a bit of context to that, every year at ESSA, we ask our members what the key trends will be for the industry going forward. At the beginning of this year, because we moved into a new decade, and the previous years, the industry's been in a phase of growth, we asked what would be the key trends to ensure that growth continued throughout the next 10 years. And I believe that Andy Westlake, the ESSA chairman, who took you through those trends in the last webinar, so you should have a good idea of those. However, when the pandemic hit, we knew we needed to ask our members again, not what would get them through the next 10 years, but what would be critical for recovery in 2020. That second round was taken in April, so still very much in that immediate lockdown situation. And so we repeated the survey again last month. So I'm going to take you very quickly through what changed from the beginning of the year to the early stage of lockdown, and then how that has changed again now as we asked our members to look further forward to the future and what would aid recovery. So I'm just going to attempt to share my screen, and I'm going to ask Gordon if you could just let me know when you can see that.
Perfect, Sophie.
Lovely, thank you. So that's my starting slide. As Gordon said, I am board director of European Sponsorship Association, as well as other sponsorship boards. Millhub Marketing, it's not a sports specific consultancy, but marketing and sponsorship, it certainly is. So just as a reminder, ESSA members were asked to name the top 3 trends that they think will define the way in which the sponsorship will recover. And we collated those to come up with the top 10. So what you can hopefully see now is the top 10 as of January 2020. I'm not going to spend too long on this, also because Andy took you through it on the first webinar, but what's more interesting is how these have changed over time. So if I now add April's data, and if we compare the 2 lists, we can see that some quite interesting changes happened. Both digital and esports rose sharply from positions of 4 and 10 respectively to now being both in the top 3 factors. Potentially inevitable, really, as audiences stayed at home and the only way to reach them was through digital. But organisations who didn't already have digital platforms had to work quite quickly to build them. And those who had the platforms, but perhaps used them primarily for community engagement, now found them to be their main activation channel and the only way to be able to really continue delivering their sponsors' rights and engage with their audience. Our live events and performances moved online, which opened up to new and wider audience as well. And this is a switch that many will rely on until events can return with audiences attending. And for some, the increased use of digital will become permanent. The digital transformation that we saw at position 4 at the start of the year, and that actually wasn't even in the top 10 back in 2019, was now supercharged through necessity into top place. Another trend through necessity is community and CSR, which re-entered the top 10, having been number 1 in 2019, but not appearing at all in the first report of 2020. Perhaps as individuals, we felt more connected to our community, looking out for each other, and as organisations, we understood our role in helping the community through this pandemic. Whether that was simply reinforcing health and safety guidance or reaching out to those most vulnerable to deliver essentials and provide a welcome face, albeit at a distance, to those most isolated. And on the other extreme, we saw amazing innovation with companies pivoting their entire businesses to help the pandemic. We all had to adapt, and whilst the need for community support might have lessened right now, we've moved out of that sort of immediate emergency state. The lessons we learnt will stay with us. Better sponsorship relationships came straight into the top 10 list at number 4. We think that many sponsorship relationships will have been strengthened as a result of needing to work better together, being more empathetic of the other party's situation, and seeing the opportunity to collaborate on meeting the needs of a shared audience. But many sponsorships will also have had critical flaws brought to the surface, and conversations around honouring agreements could have been very tense. It's also not over yet. Uncertainty still remains over when events will return, under what circumstances they will be, and with what sponsorships rights being able to be delivered. So relationships are critically important for managing that uncertainty to achieve the best possible outcomes for both parties. And whether we are in the middle of a crisis or during business as usual, there are particular steps that can be taken to strengthen those relationships. And rights holders have the chance now to work more proactively towards continuous improvement of their relationships, obviously with the aim of increasing the likelihood of contract renewals. This is a particular area of focus of the work that I do at Mill Harbour, so I was very pleased to see this recognised by the industry as a key factor for recovery. Flexibility followed at number 5. And it's kind of linked to better relationships, as this referred to the flexibility in delivering sponsorship. And here I can also reference the first wave of ESSA's sponsorship sentiment tracker, where 72% of brands were looking to extend their sponsorship rights and 48% planning to add new assets to fulfill their sponsorship contracts. Both of these will require flexibility from rights holders, and it appears that simply extending sponsorship contracts for another 12 months or so has been quite a common solution. Sustainability was the top trend at the start of 2020, has only fallen to 6th place, and purpose remains its position at 7. All of this is quite reassuring for those companies who were positioned for these longer term trends pre-COVID, that they are still relevant even when immediate priorities change. The pandemic has required all companies to stop and reflect on what their true purpose is And while sustainability might have taken a more survival-based definition for the short term, there is an opportunity to reset and ensure we can operate in a truly sustainable way for the longer term. So for the April 2020 data, creativity, personalisation and collaboration make up the rest of the top 10. Personalisation was higher at the beginning of the year, at number 6, but creativity and collaboration enter for the first time. We think collaboration is aligned with better relationships as well, but also indicates new collaborations. And finally, creativity will certainly be paramount when faced with so much content being distributed through a concentration of channels. And when more events return, we will quickly reach a saturation point. So creativity, we think, will be the key to stand out from the clutter of content. So let's see how they've changed again. And if I bring in the data taken just last month in October. This is our future gazing now, what SM members believe will now be the key to recovery going forward. Digital activation remains firmly at the top, and we've specified activation here really encompassing digital assets and digital content and experiences, but not the digital transformation and perhaps infrastructure-based meaning that we saw back in January. Audiences in venues, it sounds obvious that that will make a big difference, but when we asked this question back in April, there was perhaps the perception that the pandemic might only last a few months. It might not be as disruptive as has come to pass. And so the uncertainty now of when audiences can come back into venues and when they'll actually want to is very uncertain. That then increases the uncertainty for rights holders, of course, and venues and sponsors, particularly if agreements need to be renewed now, but we can't say for sure on what basis we'll actually be able to deliver them on. So when attendance and hospitality and VIP events come back, we think that they will be even more of a premium experience than before. So rights holders again need to work with sponsors to deliver those excellent experiences for everyone. Measurement is very interesting, returning back at number 3, as if this sort of dropped from the priority in the immediate short term after COVID hit, but now very much back on the agenda, improving sponsorship's effectiveness when budgets will be under more scrutiny than ever as sponsors review and evaluate their portfolios. Flexibility has crept up as community and CSR has moved down. And I should also say that the CSR label now also includes sustainability and purpose within that same category. But still quite remarkable to be in the top 10 and at number 5, which shows its importance in the face of some extremely difficult market and business conditions. Innovation is another one that disappeared in April, but has come back in slightly lower position than it was in January. But we've seen a lot of innovative initiatives in new collaborations and content and platforms. A lot of innovations, or at least acceleration, has happened as people have had to adapt and build new platforms in order to still deliver to their audiences. Better sponsor relationships is still in the top 10, but down 3 places, perhaps after those initial moments of truth happened when things really counted. It's pleasing for me that this is seen as a longer term trend for the future, as rights holders in particular need to look for sponsorship revenue that perhaps has been lost and might continue to be lost through tickets and broadcasts and other means. So there's a need to ensure their current partners are satisfied with the relationship and that the right infrastructure is in place as well to reassure new partners. Virtual experiences and events had not made it onto the list in April, but have gained importance now as we perhaps look to replace events that are cancelled or delayed for more than the few months that we perhaps first thought. Similarly, esports still on the list, but quite a big drop since April. That could be because rights holders are expecting their sport to return soon and perhaps can't resource both elements. Or it might be seen as an alternative and not a replacement. We don't really have enough data to speculate on the actual reason for that, so it will certainly be very interesting to see where this one lands when we repeat the annual trends survey early in the new year. And finally, content and social media has come in as a few of the others. Creativity and personalisation have dropped out, although perhaps people are labelling those under broader terms now. So that's ESSA's answer to what the future of sponsorship holds, certainly in the short term. And so thanks to the insight of the ESSA members across 20 different countries for contributing to that. We will be rerunning what will be the annual version again in the new year, which will be slightly longer term looking. And so we can come back and tell you what the future looks like according to ESSA members then. And finally, I'd like to invite everyone to take part in the ongoing sponsorship sentiment tracker, which ESSA is launching, which also includes this trends survey as part of it. You can do that as well as become an ESSA associate for free at sponsorship.org. And if you have any questions about any of this data or the research that ESSA does, you can drop me an email, which you should see on screen, which is sophie@millharbourmarketing.com. Gordon, I feel that I've really whizzed through that. Do you have any questions for me?
Absolutely, it's superb to have that insight into the future, Sophie. That was very, very interesting. Thank you. I suppose it's quite interesting looking at the changes, because I wouldn't imagine that these changes would normally, in a normal year, take place as quickly or swiftly. But what was quite interesting was looking at topics such as women in sport and sustainability dropping completely off. So these have been areas of interest to a lot of rights and sponsors. And also taking a look at collaboration coming in for the first time ever, which I think has been very important. And we as an agency have found that we are collaborating a lot more on sponsorship with rights holders and with other parties involved. What do you think? Do you think, for example, esports, which a lot of people will question, is it really sport? Where do you see esports coming in moving forward? Do you think they will sustain that growth, or how do you feel about things like that?
I think the esports industry in itself certainly will. I think when we're talking about it from the perspective of the traditional sports world, I think it depends on your audience and what their needs are and how you can provide value to them. I think a lot of sponsors have certainly had it on their agenda. Everyone feels a need to at least look into it, whether they feel it helps them align with their sponsorship objectives. It depends on what those objectives are. If you're trying to associate with a certain brand values, does esports, whether as a standalone team or event, do they have the same values that the equivalent traditional sport has? So I'm sure it will continue to grow. I think that the numbers have for a long time been very impressive. I think it's the crossover between perhaps governing bodies or rights holders trying to do both. I think that would be the really interesting area.
And tell me your thoughts on the future of sponsorship when currently we don't have an exit route for COVID-19. It has been a very difficult year for sponsorship in general. But what are your thoughts on, obviously, when we do have a vaccine? We have had an announcement about a vaccine, but there are some varying periods of time saying that's going to be available. What do you think is going to happen in the sponsorship market? There are a lot of people listening to this who are in sport and really keen to show value in what they're doing. How do you feel the sponsorship market is going to be when there's an announcement or when this period is over?
I think it'll probably be gradual. Obviously the vaccine is going to be gradual in its rollout whenever it happens, and people's aversity to risk will be gradual as well. There'll be people who are dying to get back to their sporting events, their music festivals, their arts venues. Some people will be dying at the first opportunity to do that. Others will be far more cautious. And so I think, and the same goes not only for the attendees, but for the sponsors. Whilst an event might technically be able to have people there, the sponsors still might be on a company-wide policy of staff can't travel, staff can't go to things. They also, for their own personal reasons, might not want to. So I think there'll probably be a sort of a hybrid of the virtual real for a while. But when the audiences are there, whether it's sports, arts, culture, entertainment, then of course the sponsors want to be part of that. And I think the moment where we sort of do or can open the doors with real confidence is going to be quite a quite cultural moment in whatever your event is. And so of course sponsors will want to be part of that. So I think coming back to the point of collaboration, it's the rights holders working with the sponsors to make sure that they can give the attendees the confidence to attend firstly, and they give them an excellent experience when they're there. And working with sort of transport and logistics, because whilst in your venue, whether it's a stadium or a gallery or a theatre, you might be able to provide a safe experience, but perhaps people might not feel safe on public transport getting there. So I think it's working with all the partners together to bring people back comfortably.
And one last question for you. How important do you feel valuation is of sponsorship during, through this COVID period? How important do you feel that is?
Valuation, so valuing prior or measuring effectiveness?
Valuing and measuring as a generic subject over it all for both rights holders and participants.
Yeah, well, I think measurement, we've seen from the trends, I just glanced to my second screen, it's come back in. Measurement is back up and third. I think it's going to be very important for sponsors, because I'm sure from very early on they had their finance departments saying, you've spent all this money with the rights holder and we're not getting what we paid for. Are you going to ask for any of that back? Or new installments due to be happening. Why do we want to pay the next installment when we're not having the event? So I think measurement will be really key for the sort of the sponsorship manager, if you like, that point of contact between their finance team and the rights holder, to be able to prove the value, to be able to prove its worth, whatever your objectives are, to be able to say, this particular sponsorship is working or this one isn't. And if you are having budgets cut and you have to sort of streamline your portfolio as a sponsor, then being able to measure is pretty important in doing that. But also for rights holders to be able to help the sponsors to do that. Rights holders want to know how happy the sponsors are, or how the sponsorship is performing for them, and what they can do to help improve that, because of course they want the renewal. So, I mean, measurement has perhaps not always been important. People were just quite happy to go along and enjoy an event. But I think with budgets and planning and resource of all types under more scrutiny than ever, then yes, it will be critical.
We have quite a few more questions coming in the Q&A point down there. But what I'll do, Sophie, if you don't mind, is I'll leave it until the very end.
Of course.
Hold on. And we'll move on now to our next speaker, if you don't mind. But thank you very much indeed, Sophie.
Thank you.
So our next speaker is well known, certainly up here in Scotland, Mel Young. He's a social entrepreneur. Mel has been well known in his previous life as before being chairman of Sport Scotland, with brands such as well-known brands, publishing brands such as The Big Issue. And he has now currently, and has been for a few years, the chairman of Sport Scotland. We were very fortunate to have Mel at our last conference, and he provided a bit of insight. Obviously, the Sport Scotland governing body look after all the governance of all the sub-brands below it, such as Boxing Scotland, Snow Sport Scotland, RYA Scotland, and they all sit within the Sport Scotland portfolio. So without much further ado, I shall introduce Mel Young to give his perspective on sport and the future of sponsorship. Mel.
Hi, Gordon, and hello to everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me along to speak today. I remember the conference last year was very, very good, and really enjoyed Sophie's presentation there, a fascinating insight to what's going on in with sponsorship. Quite a bit of volatility there in amongst the sponsor members over the past months during COVID. I think what I'd like to just do in the first 5 minutes here is just kind of say exactly where Sport Scotland is. We have a vision for an active Scotland where everybody benefits from sport. That's our simple vision. And we're very determined that sport is central to the lives of everybody in Scotland. Everybody who wants to participate at whatever level has an opportunity. The slide in front of you, Sports for Life, is our new strategy. And basically it means sport for everybody for life. And we have a mission behind that, which is 5 elements. First of all, it's about making an impact together. So we will collaborate and work in partnership, work with anybody and any organization that wants to enhance sport. We want to make sport more accessible. So nobody should be in a position to say, I can't do sport for whatever reason. We want to make sure that all doorways and barriers are open and available so that people can access sport no matter what their background is. We want to encourage an atmosphere where everybody progresses to their own level. So it's an opportunity for you to get to the top level, to be in for winning gold medals and international cups, but at the same time, just moving into very slow space if that's what you want to do. Everybody finding their own level. And we also want to contribute to an active Scotland. So critically for us, Sport Scotland is sitting within the health portfolio in the Scottish Government. And that's very different from many other countries. And within that health portfolio in government is Active Scotland division, which is about encouraging everybody to be active. A health imperative, which is even more imperative given the situation with the pandemic for any government. And it's about what role sport can play in making sure that people can be active. So very, very interesting relationships developed there, and sport moving much more centrally into where government wants to go in the future in terms of its health priorities, rather than at something that's at the periphery of that discussion. And of course, we want to, and we do, celebrate the impact of sport and tell that story. We have underpinning values, so we obviously want to be inclusive, we're collaborative, and we want to be the best in the world. So we want to have the best sports system in the world for everybody. And we do that, we encourage partnerships, and we have created partnerships. We encourage people to be involved in this, and we will build facilities where people can participate in sport. So basically, in some senses, we are the foundation of sport. We're holding it together, supporting as far as possible every single sporting organization. We're the catalyst to make things happen. So I've got a very short video now that I'd just like to share, which will illustrate what I'm saying. So that's a very short video that kind of illustrates what I was saying, hopefully. If we move on to the next slide, critical to part of this, as I was saying, and relates to sponsorship, which I'll mention in a moment, is the bedrock is everything is around in our clubs and our communities. Before even Sport Scotland was invented, all over Scotland, there are these fantastic clubs, some of them really small, in some small villages. Everywhere you will find volunteers and people in the community running sports clubs, and they're the bedrock of much of our community life in Scotland. Those of you who live in Scotland, you'll know that. And we've created community sports hubs where clubs can come together and be supportive in one physical environment. And that's been proved to be very successful. We also have active schools initiatives as well. And then moving on to the next slide, of course, performance sport really matters to us. And there's a picture of Duncan Scott very recently. He's been a world champion, Olympic medalist, and just last week was busy winning more medals. Gordon already mentioned in his introduction, last week we had the Scottish football team inspiring the nation as dark winter days approached under a pandemic. There they were and went and qualified, and everybody celebrated, and they're playing again tonight, so I'm sure they'll do it again tonight. Early in the summer we had Gemma Reekie and Laura Muir wonderful Scottish athletes performing at the top of the world stage, and doing some exceptional performances and great prospects for Olympic medals. So with all of that added together, you get what Sport Scotland is all about, and what we drive for sport. Now, coming back to the theme of this conference, how do we pull that together with sponsorship? And I think there has been some shift, and we saw in the previous presentation from Sophie there, just about how there's that volatility in terms of what sponsors are thinking about. But yesterday I was on one of these conferences, a bigger conference for the European Commission. A lot of the every government officials were involved, I think, across Europe, companies, Adidas, people from the sport and development sector, and talking about the future of sport post-pandemic. Now, Thomas Bach, the IOC president, made a very important keynote speech in which he said, really now we're talking about the future of sport and indeed the soul of sport. What is sport going to be about when we come out of the pandemic? Is it going to be, are we going to be part of the entertainment industry, or is sport going to be part of the sports industry? And where does all that sit? And are certain aspects, certain sports now becoming too commercial? And actually, is there a pushback to it? And that's essentially where the debate needs to be, he said. He went on to talk about whether we were going to, as the pandemic ended, go back to the way it was before. So simply we will revert in terms of sponsorship, commercial support for certain sports, and that's the way things are going to continue to go. Or actually, is it going to be some major change in the way sport is looked at and talked about by governments and others, and indeed sponsors? So he has been provocative to create the debate, and he did create the debate. And one of the things that I think has emerged right now is that during this pandemic, attitudes are changing. People are pushing back, for example, against big sports organizations. So you can see that when FIFA/UEFA, whichever one of them, was talking about a major European league for just the rich clubs, people weren't liking it at all. Big pushback against it. But it still might be coming, it still might emerge in fruition. So which way is this going to go? Is it going to be more like that, or are we going to see more going towards grassroots? It's interesting. Also, I've been on some other of these type of calls and conferences with some of the big global businesses, not necessarily talking about sport, but talking about what their attitude and their policies was going to be coming out of the pandemic. And one of the things they said, all of them unanimously, is we have to be seen to be giving back. We cannot just simply be about making huge amounts of profits. There has to be something giving back to the community. People are saying that community matters to them, and that's going to be very, very important. So how we spend our money, what we seem to be doing, and what our purpose is going to be absolutely key to us. So that landscape and attitude is changing for the future. Now, I would have a belief, actually, that companies that are getting this are going to be the companies that are going to be successful in the future, because they're going to connect up better to their customers, and their customers are going to be much more connected up to their community and neighborhoods, given what's happened and given the time that they've had to think over these past months about what the values that they have are. A fascinating time, I think, to be around. So for me, and in part given Sophie's presentation, I think there's a fantastic opportunity here now for sponsors and companies, and Scotland, given the way Scotland is. So as you'll know, Scotland is not a big country. We don't have big football teams or big sports that can attract necessarily huge amounts of money. We have the rugby in the SRU, we have some of the football teams, but after that, you're talking about smaller sports and much more community-based clubs and organizations. But actually, if I was speaking to sponsors just now, I would be going, you know what? The trick is to actually sponsor and support these type of community sports and organizations and smaller sports, because actually they'll give you a better bang for your buck in long term. Added to which, you can see that the trend from government and others is they have to invest in and support the sports sector as it becomes an imperative to this getting people physically active, as I said earlier. So in my opinion, the landscape is actually changing. We are the Agency for Sport in Scotland, and I'm happy to facilitate discussions. But I think there's a trick here, because what you can actually demonstrate is some fantastic storytelling through these sports clubs and different sports in Scotland, and actually some impact in the wider community, which you can actually demonstrate clearly by the association. And I saw that measurement issue was emerging in Sophie's previous presentation. So I probably would finish by saying this is a really, really interesting area. And it's good, Gordon, that once again you've been able to put this conference on. We are living, whether we like it or not, in a really changing environment. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, let alone next week, let alone in 4 or 5 months. We can try and influence the outcome. But I think there's huge potential here for the sports sector connected with sponsorship in Scotland, and it's like never been before. And oddly, it's very, very difficult for sports and all of us just now, very, very difficult for us as businesses. But actually, if we look at this in a constructive, positive way, I think we can see lots of opportunities. I'll finish there on hopefully a positive note, Gordon, and certainly up for further discussion. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mel. That's really useful to hear that from you on behalf of Sport Scotland. And yes, it is a changing environment. Tell me, obviously, you mentioned some of the athletes, Laura Muir, and obviously the Scottish football team. Tell me, do you believe that winning gives added value? A winning team or a winning athlete or a winning community group provides a better value for a commercial sponsor?
Well, that depends actually what the commercial sponsor wants. I would say obviously in any sport, if a sponsor's getting behind a team and it's winning, well, that's good news. It's a good story to tell. But my view would be a sponsor needs to have a longer term relationship with the sport and support that sport or that team through thick and thin. Actually, that longer term, and I think, my final points I was making, we need longer term relationships. The sponsor needs to work with that sport through thick and thin, and we'll get more out of it. Winning, certainly Scotland winning the other night was fantastic for the nation, and we love that moment. But we also want to sports. Scotland went through some very, very thin periods before that, and the sponsors, that stick with it, gain a lot of respect.
And I suppose it brings me on to another question. We have got quite a few questions for you, but if you don't mind, just to the participants who've put their questions in, we'll hold these questions to the very end of the conference and put them to you, Mel. But I suppose just leaving you with one last question. Entertainment and sport, obviously the culture is changing. There is no doubt about COVID-19 making a significant mark on companies to change. How are Sport Scotland going to adapt and change to the new influences that, for example, were brought out by Sophie's question and your comments about purpose and things like that?
I mean, it's a good question. I mean, I think us within the organisation, we just have to be aware that we're going to have to be an organisation that has to deal with change. Change is going to happen, so we have to be geared up to be able to be responsive to change and very, very fast change. I think any organisation, ours included, any sponsor organisation has to be like that. And if you're not, you're going to get into trouble. So we are a government agency, so we have our 4-year plans and so on. So it's more of a challenge for us. But I think the answer to that question is we have to be a change organisation and up for it. And we certainly will be, because, as I said earlier, we can see the potential for sport in Scotland. It's going to be a very, very important area, I think, as we come out of COVID, because there are going to be all sorts of issues about our physical and mental well-being, and sport has a key role to play in that. And then sponsors coming in at the back of that as well. So we'll certainly be open and up for any conversation, and that will be our contribution.
Thanks, Mel. Well, I suppose your point is well made there, that sport is going to be, because people have been, in theory, trapped indoors, or they've not been going out or not being as active with the lockdown, that sport is going to play an invaluable part in Scotland next year in getting people back, purely from a health perspective and just getting them active again. And that is very, very important. So that is another sector that may be open for sponsorship. But Mel, thanks very much for that insight.
Thanks, Gordon. Thank you.
And now it brings me on to introducing our third speaker today. So Mark Harrison. Mark is currently based in Toronto. He's president and CEO of the T1 agency and various other sports marketing agencies over in North America. So Mark is also the founder of Sponsorship X, which is probably the world's largest sponsorship conference. I keep forgetting not to put the word sport in there because it's generic sponsorship, can be culture and arts as well. But I'd like to introduce Mark Harrison and hear Mark's view on what the future of sponsorship holds. Mark, welcome.
Thanks very much, Gordon. Appreciate being here. I'm just gonna get my slides going. Of course, that's not the slides I want to show. Now everybody got to see my email for the day. So hopefully this will work this time. Great. Am I showing the right slides or am I showing my presenter notes?
We're looking at the right slides, Mark.
Great. So obviously an important question for all of us when we think about what does the future of sponsorship hold? What does it look like? There's lots of conversations about data, personalization, customization. And of course, part of this pandemic is that many of us are at home cooking, spending time with our families, exercising at home. I just received my Peloton this week, still have a good 40 pounds to go. But when you think about this question, it really puts not just one question on the table, but multiple questions. How will it impact brands? How will it impact consumers? How will it impact rights holders? Gordon's giving away a lot of books. I have to admit that I was a bit jealous that mine wasn't on the list. But recently I published a book. And the tenor of that book is really understanding that from my perspective, sponsorship is a people business. And when I look at sponsorship and what sponsors want, I look at 5 things. I'm going to take you through those 5 things quickly and then show you how I've reframed them for the future. To me, the best definition of sponsorship is it's to borrow equity. What I mean by that, in very simple terms, is that a brand wants to talk about itself in a different way, and a property, a festival, a cause, a sport allows it to talk about itself in a different way. Secondly, a brand wants to tell stories. They want to talk about achievement. They want to talk about triumph. They want to write their own movie. Brands want to engage stakeholders, which can range from everything from government to their own employees to influencers, to customers, clients, and distribution. Brands want to see proof. And one of the most important things is that sponsors want to get promoted. And when I talk about sponsors wanting to get promoted, I'm talking about the individual that sits across the desk. At T1, our job is very simple. It's to get our clients promoted. How do we help her advance in her career? But as we look forward and look at what we've learned from 2020, I would adjust those 5 principles. Brands not only want to borrow your equity right now, they are looking at you to be experts. They're looking at you to provide scenario planning, to provide insights, to tell them what's going forward. They don't just want to tell stories. They want to increase platforms and look for new ways. Right now, generating revenue has never been more important than engaging stakeholders. And they don't want to just see proof. They've got to convince bosses. One of the first meetings I had this morning was helping one of my clients equip her to go in front of her board. She's never presented to her board before. And all that sums up to me is about staying employed. So when you look at this slide, it kind of provides you a contrast and digging into the details. So I'll just highlight a couple of things. What I mentioned in scenario planning, it is our job as sponsorship salespeople to be experts, to provide insights. You notice when I talk about convincing bosses, you need to provide constant information. They need live dashboards. They need industry intel. And one of the biggest challenges for sponsors right now is for the last 10 years, the CMO has already been a neglected part of the C-suite. The CFO, the CTO, the CIO, they all have more power, they all have more cred. Right now, sponsors are trying to stay employed. You've got to provide them with 24/7 support. You've got to eliminate all surprises. So I want to take a step back here and actually tell you what I think the true future of sponsorship is. In my mind, you should think about the greatest invention in history, and that's fire. Fire just wasn't something that allowed people to stay warm. Fire provided a new way to eat. You could cook food, you could cook meat, you could actually digest it. Fire extended territories because it allowed humans to live in areas they couldn't live in before. Fire single-handedly invented storytelling because after the head of the family would be out all day, rummaging for food, staking out new lands, they would come back and over that fire, much like you might over candles at a dinner or a fire at your cottage or a bonfire, share stories. So I want you to think about how are you going to invent fire? That, for me, is the future of sponsorship. That will allow you then to start to think about new experiences and not just physically distant experiences, but what is the entire value proposition that you are offering and how are you changing that? When you start thinking about inventing fire, you'll start thinking about new business categories, fintech, telehealth, logistics. These are all categories that are emerging around the world in every market that we look at. Domestic tourism is becoming a big, big priority. Yesterday, for one of the properties I sit on an advisory board for, they are changing their entire business model around working with host destination cities on a license fee model. Because right now there's much more potential in that than there is necessarily in traditional sponsorship. You also need to look forward to new customers. If you don't have a Gen Z plan in your business plan, you are going to be out of business, not just in 5 years, but today, tomorrow. The Gen Z differences between them and the millennials is very extreme. Gen Zs are entrepreneurial. Gen Zs are much harder working. Gen Zs are much more loyal. In fact, Gen Zs hate millennials more than you do because they want to drive forward. They want to actually take ownership of their own career. More Gen Zs in America want to start their own business than they want to go to university. And you need to look at new channels. If you don't have a TikTok platform for your property right now, get one by the end of the day today. If you're not looking at the car as the new PPE and rebuilding your event. In Canada, we love to ride around on these things called snowmobiles. You cannot buy a snowmobile in Canada right now. They are sold out. Cross-country skis are sold out. Permits for snowmobile trails are sold out. What are the new channels that are going to exist and continue to exist? And at a higher, more philosophical level, there are new expectations. Race has never been a bigger issue in North America. Mental health has never been a bigger issue in North America. All forms of diversity and diversity issues ladder up into mental health challenges. And food insecurity. Those are the top 3 issues right now in North America. Race, mental health, food insecurity. So when you step back and think about what business you're in and how you're going to sell sponsorship in the future, regardless of there being a vaccine, regardless of there being a cure, regardless of the fact that we finally got rid of that idiot in the White House. I promise not to get political, but there it comes. I want you to reframe the business you're in. You are not in the trade show business. If you send out a sponsorship deck that says, sponsor our trade show, you are going to go nowhere. There is no future. Trade shows, expositions are about building the economic fabric, the framework, about advancing industries, markets, and customer groups. There's a lot of conversation about esports. There are some brilliant lessons to be learned by people like Epic Games. As they build their platforms and their properties and their championships, they build their IP. So don't think of yourself as, oh, we're selling this off to the highest bidder. How are we building our IP? And while it might seem like an odd thing to talk about festivals right now, what I love about festivals is community building. That's what they're at the heart of. And again, I go back to that insight that domestic tourism, that despite the fact there'll be vaccines and cures, that people are still going to be hesitant to travel, even if it appears safe, because they'll be thinking about the people that got trapped. That when you think about the beauty and the strength, the foundation of a festival, it's really around building community. And despite the fact that in many segments, people are losing their jobs hand over fist, in very high pursuit categories, high recruitment categories where you need expertise, employee engagement is through the roof. The number of HR firms and HR services that are growing during this pandemic and getting funded is unbelievable. I talked before about a trade show being an economic powerhouse. There's a conference in Austria called 15 Seconds that has one of the most intriguing exhibitor programs ever, but it's all built on the notion of it's a loyalty program. The reason that many events are in trouble right now is we've been selling 10 by 10 booths instead of selling loyalty programs. We have been so event-based, the action-based, non-IP-based. For those of you who are American football fans, and I'll put American in quotes, one of the most amazing events is when hundreds of thousands of people get together in April to watch a college superstar be drafted to the team that has selected them. They walk up on stage and they get a baseball hat and a big hug from Roger Goodell. But the beautiful thing about sport and the beautiful thing about events like this is in the off season, everybody has hope. In Canada, we think we might even make the World Cup someday of soccer. That's a pipe dream. So you think about what you're doing. You're not selling sponsorship. You're not putting decks together. You're lighting fires for the future of change. When I think about the things that have come out of this pandemic, the winners are going to be those that truly understand their IP, their intellectual property, their value to society. And the losers are those who are going to be still selling signage, 10 by 10 booths, and logos. Thank you very much.
Mark, thank you. That was incredibly inspirational. Thank you, and gave us a real insight into North America and some of the marketplace interests, the marketplace developments that are taking place over there. And you also put a really interesting slant on it, which came very, very clearly through. Talk me through, if you don't mind, Mark, just a little bit of a specific. You were talking this morning that you had a conversation pre this webinar, but could you give me an example of something that you've clearly been involved in that's been part of everything you showed there? So talking through, you're heavily involved with American football and ice hockey over in Canada, and the sponsorship of some of these. Any new insights into where something that was quite unique that came in that gave you a little bit of inspirational, that was really creative, that you could showcase for us as an example?
In terms of sponsorships?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, because the meeting I had this morning was helping arm and bulletproof somebody who's about to go in front of their board. So that wasn't so inspirational, but I'm happy to talk more about that. But one I will talk about, and I had nothing to do with it, is I loved the campaign that Pepsi did in the United States around the start of the National Football League. And one of the things you have to understand is that in American sport lexicon, baseball is the ultimate pastime. It's kind of hanging out and being in the crowd, right? Basketball is about lifestyle. It's about coolness. It's about all the rest of it. The National Football League is the Americans' proxy for war, okay? There are words in the lexicon of football like bomb, like blitz, like shotgun. They're all militaristic. When they stopped just having players play offense and defense, they called it the platoon system. But the other thing you need to understand is when you go to an NFL game, it is that time when you put on your colors, and it is truly that time for you to be from Boston, from Pittsburgh. And the notion of getting together and those tickets being passed down through time. So one of the most amazing things that the NFL did, and I'll use my team, the Pittsburgh Steelers, is they actually had a story about a family that had season tickets for generations. And the mom and dad used to sit in those seats. And the mom passed away a few years ago of cancer. And so the son sits with his dad, and that's their ritual. And Pepsi went to the actual stadium, got those seats, and had some retired players deliver them to their home. Now, it's a piece of content, and I know we're doing lots of content, and we've all got great content examples. But for me, the insight there was when you saw their actual house, if they went to buy those season tickets today, they couldn't afford them. They will clutch those season tickets to the death. And I just thought it really reinforced the notion of the power of that moment, of that shared experience, and just brought it to life. And we've seen lots of great content. So I'll just use that as an off the top of the head example.
So what you're really saying is it's not about storytelling, it's about creating the story, isn't it?
Well, look, I think there's a bunch of paths. I like to steal ideas, and Coca-Cola uses this expression now, story doing, which is how you're engaging the consumer in the story and how they're creating it. And so one of the reasons that we're very bullish with TikTok, and we've been able to get a couple of our very conservative clients to go onto TikTok and use the platform. And despite what you might hear out of the States, TikTok's not the devil. But if you look at it, it's about being part of that story. So, I don't know if you've seen it in Scotland, but if you haven't, check out the Dreams video by a guy named Dogface on TikTok. So this guy lives in Idaho. He makes $9, $10 an hour as a potato sacker. Now, I don't even know what a potato sacker is, but in a plant, he's driving his car to his job. The car breaks down, and he doesn't want to be late for work, so he gets his longboard out, which is, my kids tell me is a long skateboard, kind of obvious. He jumps on it. He's now skateboarding to work, decides to do a video of himself drinking Ocean Spray. He's also half Mexican, half Native American. Ocean Spray is a big drink among Indigenous people. Sets it to Fleetwood Mac Dreams. It goes super viral. In less than 24 hours, the CEO of Ocean Spray does a video. Mick Fleetwood opens his first TikTok account. He's doing one. TikTok runs an ad. They end up creating an ad that goes on NFL games. But the point is, that story doing is because the hero of the story was the person. And again, I don't work for TikTok, but I look at what TikTok does. Its genius is simple. It allows you to be the story, not just post a video, but actually tell a story.
And TikTok, obviously, as a distribution communication vehicle over there, it tends to have different audiences depending on where you are in the world. So, for example, here, you would potentially say it would be about the 12, 13, 14-year-olds, whereas in Brazil, it's for business people, so it's quite difficult to kind of account for where its audience is. What are your thoughts on the kind of social media, which is going to be the next social media tool for an athlete to be on, or a team to be on, to provide that kind of media content and value?
Well, I'll go back to there's a reason I put the slide in there, and I basically could pull my hair out trying to talk clients into getting on TikTok right now. So I'm going to be repetitive. If you're watching this webinar and you're not on TikTok as an organization, you have zero excuses. I don't want to hear about it's young, it's this, they're spying on us. It's a great platform to raise money, get your message out. The next one is Triller, which is basically another form of TikTok. It's a US group that's trying to take advantage of the political situation. But for me right now on November 18th, and the other thing I'll say about social media is, at the end of the day, the biggest problem is that organizations often use all social media for one message. So one of the things we love to do, so we have a series of brand clients, but we also have a series of not-for-profit clients, charities, the Canadian Paralympic Committee, the Red Cross. Use LinkedIn to create the warm call. You should never, ever have to make a cold call, because if you're a smart sponsorship salesperson, you're using LinkedIn to make the warm call. That should be that should be the heart of your B2B marketing campaign.
Thanks very much, Mark. Really, really insightful and really good to hear your views, because it gives a bit of clarity as to where you should be going, certainly on things like LinkedIn and aspects like that. So thank you very much, Mark. And I'm going to bring all three of my speakers onto the screen now, and we're going to open it out to the audience. And we've got quite a few questions.
Do you mind if I let my dog in? He's at the door. He wants to eat.
Bring your dog in. Yeah, bring
You
your dog.
definitely need a pet on board.
Yeah, Alice next to me, who's working all the technical side of this, she basically nearly cut you off, Mark, when you said that Generation Z hate even the millennials. You know, she nearly pushed the button to stop, but she said,
Alice, are you Gen Z or are you millennial? I need to hear from the production room.
I think I'm millennial, but I'm not actually sure.
Well, you're hated. Just for the
so we're going to bring in, now everybody should be able to unmute themselves, but I would like to ask David Stewart to come on, and if you don't mind, we'll go in the same order as speaker, and I would quite like you all to answer this. So if we could start with you, Sophie, then Mel, and then Mark answer the question. So can I bring on David Stewart, please? David. If not, we'll read the question out.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Just a little bit louder, David, if you don't mind, please.
I can't hear anything, Gordon.
No, nothing at all. David, if you don't mind, we'll just maybe ask the question. I've got it on screen here. So for you, Sophie, if you don't mind, if you could answer this, and then we'll move on to Mel and Mark. But how do you think sponsorship can be best used to improve lives, sport, performance, the wider economy, and the world? I believe in message and narrative. So if you'd like to answer that, how do you believe sponsorship can be used to improve lives, sport, and performance? Sophie.
And the world, Gordon. I think by providing opportunity, providing access, whether it's providing experiences, education, or entertainment to people that might not otherwise be able to access that, either because a rights holder wouldn't be able to create the exhibition or the program or the sporting event, whatever we're talking about, without sponsorship investment, or whether it goes ahead anyway, but the sponsor can provide some extra insight to that. So a very short answer to a question with a very broad scope is by providing opportunity.
Well, I think David did qualify. It's quite a long question, and I probably didn't bring in. So he's looking to start an esports foundation, and he's looking to try and get advice probably on helping. He's looking to do something CSR, you know, to create cause behind it. So he wanted to aid community and reduce isolation and improve lives. You know, so that's where his question's coming from. So Mel, if you don't mind trying to answer that question there, please, or your advice on that.
Sure. It's a bit, I guess the answer is in kind of the second part of my presentation, really. I just believe, first of all, that sport is a really, really powerful tool, really powerful way of communicating, which is completely misused or not used effectively by sponsors and others. There's a huge opportunity here for sponsors and sport to get together to talk about what potential impact could be in the wider community. So if David's thinking of doing that through esports, that's perfect. But you need to think, right, what's the real impact of whatever David plans to do is, and yet use sport as a message for sport for good, which can create impact and tell that story, a bit like Mark was talking about there, telling that story on the back of real activity. So it's about just changing how the activation of the sponsorship is, I believe, next to the sport. And there's huge opportunities in this space right now.
I think you're on mute, Gordon, but I saw you mouth my name. At least I think you did.
Sorry, thank you, Mel.
I love going last because I get time to come up with a pithy answer. But I'm going to say capacity building, and my example would be, I find it incredibly frustrating when a brand says, "Oh, we're going to help out poor kids," which often in North America are Black kids, and we're going to build a basketball court in a poor, disheveled community. What do you frickin' do? Why don't you go in that community and teach those young people how to be business people, to look at STEM, to look at being entrepreneurs, to give them skills? So for me, I think where sponsorship can really help address some of David's question, it's really around capacity building, not just financial, but if you look at expertise that people like yourself or Sophie or Mel have, or other people in your organization.
Right, thank you. Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah, can everybody hear David? Can we hear David? Try again.
So I just wanted to say thank you. I mean, what I've been looking at is some of the current social issues, the current issues within the country here and globally after studying international politics, and looking around the life around me, but also looking at some of the challenges which COVID presents and actually blending them together. It just seems like a very sensible thing to do, and a lot of them have common universal threads to them. I think it's a lot of these problems and universal solutions.
Great, thank you. You had a further question there, David, while you're on and while we've got you there. Do you want to follow up with your second question, please?
Right, 1 moment. I was mentioning about esports. I've approached some people in the area that I'm working in, and there is a perception that computer games are all about people. They're the problem when it comes to physical activity. They're the problem when it comes to underachievement. And I disagree entirely. I agree partially. It's like the Mars bar. You've got to use it in the correct dosage for it to have its effect. Well, if you actually look at some of the studies, like Cambridge University have a study out at the moment, and they talk about how it brings people together and how it can complement performance, it can complement involvement, and it can bring people together. So how do you challenge those sort of narratives within the sports communities even, and in homes, the mother of a family is seeing computer games as unhealthy, or the father is, those kind of issues.
Sophie, would you like to come in on that?
Yeah, I think the question was around changing perception of esports as being a broader. Yeah. Well, I think if you have the evidence, I think I heard you mention a research from Cambridge there. If you have the evidence to prove that, but also to try and explain the breadth of the industry, perhaps people's perception is it's the same as traditional sport. You have your very elite, your athletes that go off to the Olympics, and you have your grassroots as well. And it's the same in esports. You have people that play, or perhaps don't even play. Perhaps they just sit on Twitch and watch other people play. And you have the people that are competing, going into competitions, and at the very top level, of course, they will be fit because they have to be. Their reflexes have to be spot on. Their concentration levels, they will be trained. So I think it's perhaps explaining these things wherever there's a misconception of anything. It's explaining the differences and putting your point forward, and that perhaps if people can potentially enter a traditional sport by playing it online, and of course esports is part of a wider gaming community as well, so people can get involved both ways. If I'm in a sword fighting game, maybe I want to take up fencing, just as an example.
I agree. Can I just add a little bit? In terms of getting people involved, a lot of the sports people and the communities out there don't actually realise what is possible nowadays, and you go to them with an idea and they go, that can't happen, that's impossible. They don't realise how easy it can be, and that is a real barrier at the moment, I'm finding.
In terms of participation, I think that the pathway in theory, if you can be good, and anyone with access to a game can enter the game, right? And if you get good, you can get followers on Twitch, and you can get up the rankings, and you can get spotted by a team and brought in. I was speaking at a conference in Denmark recently. There's lots of esport teams there, and they have spotters. They have spotters looking out for who's going to be the next, and then they train people just as football academies train their players. They bring them in, they sell them on. So in a way, it's more accessible because you don't have to have all the training equipment, and to be able to pay a sports club fee, you need a computer, but perhaps it's even more accessible.
I think you use the word hybridization, and like mine is a sort of hybridization of a current sport, not a traditional e-sport out on its own. So it's there to complement existing sports and sponsorship within that sport. So, but thank you very much.
Mel, would you like to have a little bit of input to that question again?
Yeah, sure. I think it's an interesting area. I mean, as we all know, the issue whether esports gets recognised as an Olympic sport is an ongoing discussion, and it's a very good discussion. Some people have very strong views either way. My own view is that sport as a sector really needs to embrace digital much more. We want to be using it in a way which we can be active, and it can be set up to do so. And you can see on a very basic level now, we actually reasonably recently, over only the past few years, we've got step counters that we all have, and that's digital, and we want to do our 10,000 steps, etc. Park run is actually a simple thing, which again is got digital as part of it. So I think you can use digital and you can use e-sport, encouraging people to get active as part of that whole landscape. And it's great that people are getting involved in e-sport. The one thing I would say, though, that there's clear evidence is that we, particularly young people, we have to change our lifestyle, be it sitting down playing esports or sitting down watching the television or sitting in a car. We have to stop doing that, and sport has a role to play around that. And I think connecting up what esports has got to offer with that messaging about keeping active, and somehow you win games in esports by being active at the same time as you're playing on your computer, etc., is something that's easy to advance. Sport's got a long way to go in digital. I believe in it, and it really needs to embrace it. Esports is one way of doing it.
Involvement in fan connection as well are two big possibilities for that. But thank you.
Mark, would you just like to come in on the esports question there by David?
Yeah, really quickly, I think two comments. One is esports isn't the devil. It's an education system that doesn't have enough physical activity in it every day is a bigger issue. Mel, Gordon, you and I were old enough to be told when we were kids that if we watched TV, we were going to go to the devil. And I think the second thing is learn from esports. I mean, I made my TikTok pitch today, but a year ago that pitch was Twitch, which was whatever business you're in, if you haven't Twitchified your event, if your event's not on Twitch, you're making a mistake. So I think there's lots to learn.
Thank you.
Find someone I could talk about the idea a bit more with. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for the question. Yeah, I have to say that we were involved, or my company was involved in the launch of David Beckham's company Guild when it went to look to the city for funding, and it was funded within 1 hour. Obviously, David Beckham's the biggest recipient of the funds there, but in actual fact, when you delve into it deeply, it's not actually David Beckham that's running the company, it's his children. So you can begin to see where there's some relevance there with esports. As you say, it's the millennials and the Generation Z that are pushing that anyway. So I'm going to ask, there's another question in here from George Walker. George, if you'd like to unmute yourself, please, on your microphone, and I'll let you ask your own question, and we'll start again with Sophie, if you don't mind. Okay, can you hear me okay?
I can, certainly, George.
Great. Okay, thanks a lot. Really interesting insights from all three of you. So my question is, most of the focus on sponsorship is really around about men's professional sport. So the question I've got is, what's the impact on other sectors like women's sport, disability sport? Are they going to get squeezed out just now because there's going to be a rush to try and get sponsorship into the big sports, because we've talked about American football, basketball, etc., association football. So what about the other sectors? What about the other areas? Are they going to get left behind, or is there something that we can do to make sure they that those sectors don't lose out?
My personal view would be that actually there's a great opportunity there. Some of the comments that have come up about, if we think about the brands, the sponsors, they need to fight to win over their customers. And if they are trying to understand their customer and what's important, and things like community and doing good and having purpose are all going to be critical in their buyers' decision-making process, then of course they have to be genuine in their role there. So I think that, yes, sponsorship, whether it's women's, disability, it's any kind of grassroots community level, I think that's a huge opportunity where brands will be looking for. Perhaps more on a practical note, some of those platforms are going to be on a lower level financially than the bigger platforms. So actually, if a sponsor's having to reevaluate its portfolio, it might find that it can't afford to sponsor a very large male professional sports team anymore, but actually to do a grassroots program or a women's league, it can do. So I think there's a great area of potential and opportunity there that brands will certainly want to tap into.
Sorry, Mel, would you like to answer that question?
Sure. Thanks for the question, George. I think it's a good question. I think I can 100% agree with Sophie there. I mean, if I was advising sponsors and so on, so I would be getting into this space anyway right now, because that's the one that's going to actually resonate with the wider community. Quite apart from squeezed budgets at the sponsor end, I think people are going to be not happy if you're starting to see all the money going to rich male sports. And so I think there's an opportunity there. Of course, what's required, George, is the female sports in question, the governing bodies or the clubs or whatever, need to be reaching out and making a connection. The sponsors are not necessarily just going to appear. So there's a bit of work to be done. But I think Sophie's kind of nailed it for me.
Mark.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's a double-edged sword. So when we think of those powerful sports and we use the term sponsorship, I would say, that isn't really sponsorship. That's really brand advertising, right? It's people putting their brand with something that's going to get a lot of eyeballs. But we also know that television still drives people's attention. And I do think there is some accountability from brands, advertisers, and broadcasters to pay attention. And a bit of an old story, but I remember in 2010 when we held the Olympics in Vancouver and Whistler, and Canadians, we saw every minute of the Olympics. And then the Paralympics came along, and the broadcasters were only doing 5 hours a day. And the uproar in Canada was tremendous. And it wasn't just because we're trying to be kumbaya or support the Paralympics. We just had this amazing fortnight of enjoying international athletics, and we wanted more. So I think as you look forward, some of the lessons I look at is look at the WNBA and what they've done. They call it the wobble, right? The women's bubble. But one of the things they did was they put social justice at the forefront of their return to play. And that resonated incredibly with big brands like AT&T. Look at in Canada right now, Procter & Gamble has made its single biggest sponsorship investment ever in women's hockey. An amazing product. And so, and then you look at Angel City, which is where Natalie Portman and Serena Williams' husband, and I'm saying that purposefully, right? Mr. Serena Williams, right? There's a group of superstar investors behind Angel City, which is the newest women's professional soccer team. And if you want a case study of building from ground zero, of building a brand in women's sport, I would watch Angel City.
I would just add one more thing, if I may, just kind of pre-pandemic. What we observed is that a large sponsor might come in and sponsor the whole league or tournament or high-level team, and the community element of whatever guise that is was sort of an add-on. Okay, we want the logo on the shirt, but we'll take the women's team or we'll take the grassroots program. and kind of give it 2 or 3 years, and that almost just flips. And now when we're renegotiating, the community program is the thing that they want, because it means more to the customers, it means more to the employees. Employees want more and expect more from their businesses. They want to work for businesses that they can feel proud to work for and that make a difference. So, and I think some of the women's teams that I've spoken to, in a way, a sponsor kind of can get better value, because in a high profile male sports team, that, you know, the number of appearances and the time you're actually going to get from the athletes is going to be quite small. Certainly at the moment in a women's team where they are in a development phase, they are willing to give more time and do more, because they know that they have to work a bit harder to get that sponsorship investment. So it's absolutely a great time for sponsors to approach that place.
Can I piggyback on that point Sophie's making? So when we look at research we do for our client brands, you'll see that with these higher profile properties that more consumers are aware. But when the property's values are aligned with the consumers, which with all due respect is not highly paid athletes. Yeah, I'll cheer, but that isn't inspiring me. The care, so you've got aware, but more consumers care. More consumers care about these properties we're talking about than the high profile ones. More are aware of the high. And those are two very important and very different words. Awareness and caring.
Thank you, Mark. George, does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's great. That was very useful insight. You know, I think, you know, if you look at women's sport and disability sport, it's made great strides probably in the last 10 years. You know, maybe it's just when you look at the traditional press, their focus is very much on traditional sports, men's sports. So a lot of the newer things like esports as well get squeezed out. So it's really to make sure that there's still the opportunity there for them, other sectors to, you know, get back in the game and attract sponsorship post-pandemic. So no, thanks very much.
George, one last thing I'll add to that is, look, I think it's Gen 1 that the IOC and IPC are aligning on top partners. That's going to be transformational, right? So now the IPC is going to have the benefit of being aligned with the IOC on top partners. It's either Jan 1 or it's after Tokyo. I can't remember which it is. I feel like it's Jan 1 because it was supposed to be after Tokyo originally. But that's going to be a game changer, and that will filter down to all levels of the sport system.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Thanks, George, for your question. And just to add to that, we, for example, as a company, had an all-female team on BBC Points West down in Bristol called the Bristol Gulls last night on BBC News. So, you know, women's sport is getting a profile, and in actual fact, we've had Scottish Women in Sport on the conference earlier on in the week. Maureen McGonigal, who runs Scottish Women in Sport here, talking up the benefits, and they'll be running a conference there. But, you know, I definitely think women's sport is on the up. Certainly in Scotland, there's no doubt whatsoever. And currently, I think it's actually Women and Girls Sport Week. I think we're coming to the end of it here there. So there are without a doubt some interest in it. So sorry, I have another question that's just been texted into us. Now, I don't know whether Laura Camage, now we know Laura, she was at our conference last year. So Laura, can you hear me? Are you, would you like to ask your question, please, by putting your microphone on to taking off mute? Laura.
Hi.
Oh, Laura, hi.
Hi. So I was just wondering, I currently live in Glasgow and I have sort of special training in cows on the Isle of Wight. And I was just wondering, like, how best to approach sponsors for that. And then also, I've previously competed in international teams, like where there's different nationalities. And I've kind of found that both scenarios kind of a challenge to where that fits in with sponsors, because it's not necessarily just like a Scottish team or one country. So yeah, just how to approach it.
Okay, Laura. So Sophie, I think Laura we know Laura, and Laura's she's basically based in Glasgow, and trains basically in the south coast of England with in dinghy racing,
Small keel boats.
small keel boat racing.
Yeah. So
Yeah, sorry.
sorry, on you go. It's okay.
And Laura's looking for an answer to that question. How would she approach sponsors to help her with all the training costs, etc.? I think that she has, and also being a member of a multinational team as well. They can't put a Scottish badge on it, or they can't put it's maybe an unusual question, but if you could answer it, that'd be nice.
Of course, I think I might echo the response to a very similar question on one of the earlier webinars, which was to tell your story. We've been talking about a lot of high-profile sponsorship, getting a lot of eyeballs on a lot of platforms. Not every sponsor is looking for that. They are looking to support individuals who are pioneering and wanting to achieve, and to support them in those achievements. So I would have a think about really reflecting on yourself, what you want to achieve, what your team wants to achieve, what you stand for. Really try and think about your story, or find a friend or someone and ask them to ask you questions, because sometimes it's quite hard to reflect on yourself, and build up this story of what you're trying to achieve and how that can be interesting to a sponsor, whether it's in supporting their CSR programs, or providing motivation or inspirational stories, or fundraising opportunities for their staff. So try and think of all the different ways that it is of a benefit to a business to support you. And the point on the mixed nationalities in a team, I guess that is potentially only relevant for solely Scottish businesses who only really want to support Scottish sports teams. But if there's a company that wants to support young individuals achieving, and that's sports related or that's sailing related, I'm not sure I see that as a problem. I wouldn't be something, I've worked sponsor side, that I would automatically think, oh, it's not one nationality in the boat. So I'm almost not sure it would be a consideration, unless it's a company who has previously only sponsored national teams, and for some reason that appears to be part of their objectives. I'll keep thinking about it as the others answer, but that's my main response for now, Laura, if that helps.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Mel.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think it is a question of telling a story and pushing it out there. So us Scots, we're all the same. We're all quite shy. We don't like talking ourselves up at all. So I think it's, as Sophie says, maybe getting hold of a friend or somebody from the sector to talk to you about it, because definitely you've got a story to tell, and I feel certain that there'll be some sponsor out there who will be prepared to support you. And then get this bit, as I understand what you're saying, is the difficulty between there's a sponsor from the national team, but then you need additional support. So just clarify that part out. A lot of athletes, as you know, are sponsored individually, and then play for teams that have a team sponsor. So getting that bit clarity, so just telling it's a simple story. You've got a really good story to tell. You're an athlete. You need some support, and you just need to put it out there. But get somebody through Gordon or someone from the sponsor side or Sophie, just to help you with that, and then it's a question of getting it in front of people's noses. But I feel certain you've got a great story to tell.
Thank you. It's really nice.
Yeah, completely agree. I think to Sophie's point, I actually see the international team composition being an advantage and a disadvantage. Beyond try to find somebody that just loves sailing to sponsor you, I would say try to find a company that is young and growing, and that the core tenets and principles of sailing strategy are connected somehow to their business, and get them to think about how in their business they can help you succeed and be that engagement piece. I think Sophie mentioned employee fundraising. I think employee engagement is such an overlooked part. And one of the hardest parts, and again, you'll probably ask me, how do I find this? And I would say, I'm going to look for you on LinkedIn in about 2 seconds, Laura. And you know, again, that's where your B2B marketing starts. So think of yourself as the strategy, the fundamentals, the principles that go into sailing. What industries does that resonate with?
Cool, thank you. That was really helpful.
And there's one more thing. I told you my brain would think about something else whilst the others were responding. It's connected to my previous point when we were talking about women's sport, in that very often the large sponsors of events, tournaments, will sponsor a very high level, but equally they will have another level of support that they want to give. So whoever are the very large sponsors in your sport, I think they would certainly be on my approach list to see if they have a level of funding for a lower level. But looking at Mark's presentation earlier, there were a lot of companies that have thrived in this pandemic, and the same as all the others, they want to be seen to support local endeavour or sport endeavour of any kind. So I think there are certainly areas to help, and my email was on screen earlier, but if not, I'm sure Gordon will share it with you. I'm very happy to give you some guidance and advice as well, Laura.
Thank you, that would be amazing.
Well,
yeah, I think telling the story, like from what the three of you have said in the previous webinar, like just getting the story clear, because it's not such a well-known area or such a small sort of, like there's not many Scots, that would really help, yeah.
Thanks, Laura, for your question. We know the task you have in front of you, but you're handling it very well, and delighted to see that you were at our conference last year, and you've carried out. You received sponsorship last year from the conference, so hopefully you know, keep in touch with Mark and Sophie and tell them your story. But you've got a great story to tell, and continue to do so. Well, folks, that is. Sorry, Laura. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, that brings us really to 5:30, just a little past 5:30. I wonder if we have Lisa McGee on. Lisa from QTS, the sponsors of the 4 webinars. Lisa, are you online at all just now?
Hi, Gordon.
Hi, Lisa.
Hi, guys. How are you? I'm here.
Great. Well, Lisa, first of all, Lisa is the marketing manager of the QTS, who are probably one of Scotland's largest sports sponsors. Lisa, thank you very much for your sponsorship. How have you, you've been on the previous webinars listening in, I think. What are your thoughts?
You know, I think it's great. I think it's a really positive thing for a sport that conferences like this exist. I think it's good for the industry, and it's good for the people who are actually seeking sponsorship out there, especially this year. It's been a difficult year, especially for sport. I mean, we have a young youth athlete program where we have about 14 athletes from across the UK actually part of that program, and you know, they've all struggled this year, and it's not just been maybe struggling to get sponsorship, but it's been struggling to have the motivation to stay training, and you know, they're not getting to compete, and these are young people who are constantly trying to reach the top of their sports. So it's been a real change for them this year, and for us as a sponsor, I think we've actually found that we've had to support them in different ways this year, and it's not just been about saying, oh, here's X amount of money, you know, we'll see you in a year when you come back to review that. It's very much been about building partnerships with them and making sure that, yes, we're getting the most out of the sponsorship, it's our investment, but also making sure that the young people get something good out of it as well. So no, I think this has been terrific, and thanks to all the speakers who have taken part over the 4 webinars. It's a shame we couldn't do it in real life and actually meet up and have a chat and everything after it, but hopefully next year, if you do it again, Gordon will be able to do it in real life rather than this virtual life that we've been leading over the last 8 or 9 months.
Well, Lisa, thanks very much. QTS have been superb supporters of sport in Scotland. In fact, I would quite safely say probably the biggest, and certainly from our opinion, the best in Scotland at supporting sport at all levels, events, teams, young athletes and community. So for a business-to-business rail engineering company, I'd like to thank you on behalf of all the sports and teams and individuals that you have done. And there is a lot of benefit in doing so if you are a private sector business out there looking to get involved, and you've got, hopefully you'll have heard from quite a few experts.
Yeah, it's great for us. I mean, it's something that our team, I mean, I think it was Yusuf that mentioned earlier on about, you know, the grassroots element of it. The people that work for us want to see the company doing things in the local community. They don't just want money ploughed into multi-million-pound deals where, you know, there's no connection to the local community, and that is something that we have really pushed forward over the last few years, that we want to make an impact in the communities that our employees live in and that we work in and that we impact. So it's definitely been a bit of a change of pace for us, moving from kind of the Premier League football teams, and we still do, you know, we still do the race course, and we do still have some kind of high profile events that we get involved in. But from a personal point of view, you know, it is fantastic to be involved with the young people and the things that are a bit more connected to the communities. It really, from a brand perspective, it fits really nicely with the QTS ethos for sure.
Gordon, if I may say, if Laura isn't already part of Lisa's athlete program, hopefully that's a good connection you can make there.
Yeah, I'm sure we can make the connection. I know that Laura's actually been supported by one of our other clients at the last event, so we'll certainly make sure that we try and give her a little bit of help in the future. Well, at this point in time, unless there are any more questions from anybody out there, if you would like to wave to us, I think you've got a wave. I will summarise the event by thanking QTS for sponsorship for the 4 webinars. I'd like to thank our speakers, Sophie Morris from ESSA, Mel Young from Sport Scotland, and Mark Harrison from T1 and Sponsorship X. I'd like to thank you all very much for giving us a summary, and we hope this has been useful for everybody. I would like to announce that we are launching a new programme, which we'll be launching in the next month, called Sponsor Lead. And that will be of interest to young athletes and teams. So we will be establishing that and hopefully launching it before the end of the year. So keep your eyes on via sponsorship, and we'll be able to supply any contacts on if anybody wants to network. But as Mark and Sophie said, LinkedIn is the B2B way to go, and try and touch base with people. If you've enjoyed it, write to us and tell us. If you haven't liked it, still write to us and tell us. I would like to hear from you. But I'd like to thank everybody indeed for coming on, and I'd like to thank our speakers very much once again. Thank you.
Thanks, Gordon. Thanks for organising.